Let's open up the Vintage Collection 3.75-inch figure of Grand Admiral Thrawn from Rebels. Varykino. If it's Star Wars, we collect it. Hello there, thanks for visiting Varykino. I absolutely love the character of Grand Admiral Thrawn ever since I read the original Timothy Zahn trilogy, Heir to the Empire. That of course was our introduction to the character. I read these books many times, and even if you haven't read the books, he is, I think, the best example of an original character from the books that has made the leap into mainstream storytelling for the Star Wars saga. Of course, we have his appearance in Rebels, and more recently his live-action appearance in the Ahsoka series. I think it's fantastic that we have quite a few versions of him in action figure form as well. So here we have his version of Rebels, but I think this is an interesting version because it looks more of a live action appearance. Of course, the Vintage Collection figures tend to be a little bit more live action, a little bit more realistic than the animated series figures that we had many years ago. So I'm really excited to have another version of Grand Admiral Thrawn to add to my action figure collection. So thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Coming up really soon, I'll take the figure out of the bubble so we can check out all of the details. But first, let's take one last look at the packaging. The Vintage Collection obviously takes great inspiration from the original Kenner style of packaging from the Star Wars vintage action figures from the 70s and 80s. At the top here we have the iconic Star Wars logo with the Rebels animated series logo here in red and a single chrome racetrack surrounding the character artwork here to the side. For Grand Admiral Thrawn we have a red accent color here for the nameplate with a white font and also red behind the figure. This is a fantastic promotional image of Grand Admiral Thrawn from the animated series, but I have to be honest, this isn't my favorite backing card, and that is because the figure we have here for the Vintage Collection is in a realistic style, and I feel like personally it doesn't match the artwork we have here. His tunic here is very smooth. We have a more realistic sculpted one with wrinkles and sort of fabric lines and things like that. The faces are very different. This one feels more like it is inspired by the books and comics version of Grand Admiral Thrawn. I do have the original animated style action figure of Thrawn from Rebels to do a bit of a side-by-side comparison, but I generally think the figure looks great, the picture looks great, but side by side there's a little bit of a disconnect. So personally for me, while sometimes I am tempted to keep my figures carded because the overall presentation is just fantastic, I think this is one where I'm not going to miss having the figure on the backing card. I think this one's going to look pretty cool out of the packaging. Moving on to the back. So we can see that this one is a VC296, where we still had the older black style on the back here, inspired by the original Kenner packaging. If you are curious, I have some of the other backing cards here on hand just to show you when we changed to the new style here. This one is a VC298, which was Luke Skywalker from Book of Boba Fett, next to Pre Vizsla from the Clone Wars, and this one is 299. So from 298 to 299, we changed to a new style of packaging here on the back. I know some fans do really like this original style. It's a little closer to the original Kenner packaging style. I'm not quite sure what prompted Hasbro to change up the back here. I like this style, but sometimes I also like having the action figure pictured here on the back. It's just a little bit of a change. I'm not sure which one I really do prefer. But going back to the Grand Admiral Thrawn backing card here, we can see some of the other figures that were released alongside him along this time. We also have the Vintage Collection logo here at the bottom of the chrome racetrack, and the rest of the card is filled with barcode and lots of text there. Overall, it does look pretty cool, but there's just something about the figure not really matching to the artwork here. So I think it's time to get him off the backing card so we can take a closer look. So now I have the Grand Admiral Thrawn figure and his one blaster accessory out of the packaging so we can take a closer look. So this is really fascinating because it's not exactly accurate to how we see him on screen, though of course his costume is for the most part. The details reference the animated series, but the way that it has been rendered here is in a realistic style. So it's kind of hard to judge the accuracy of this one because of course it doesn't really look exactly like how how I expect to sort of have the animated version from the show, but we'll go through all of the paint details and articulation first anyway. So I do like the face here. I always think of Thrawn as being sort of quite angular. Of course, he is from the Chiss species, so he's got this fantastic blue skin. And in the Rebels series, this was one of the first times where we saw them give Chiss black pupils. I believe that was potentially to make Chiss perhaps just a little less scary than just having full red eyes, as we had mostly seen them previously, especially in the comics. So we do have little black pupils painted in there because, of course, this is from the Rebels animated series there. He's got those strong eyebrows, not much in the way of other sort of painting accent here on the face. We've got sculpting here for those cheekbones, and of course on the forehead we've got those sort of interesting sculpting detail, and we've got a very, very dark blue paint here for the hair, which is sculpted as one piece with the head. It is not separate, but we've got a very tidy hairline here, which is very nice, going all the way around the ears and everything like that. Really nice. I do like the expression on this. It's quite different to other Thrawn action figures. Moving down, of course, we've got his Grand Admiral tunic here. Pretty much a white Imperial officer tunic, but we do have these little silver bits here on his collar. We've got the gold epaulets here on the shoulder as well. We've got 2 code cylinders on either side and his Grand Admiral rank badge there. Nice to see the accurate paint colors. There was an earlier version of the figure, I believe it was the animated series. They first put it out with an incorrect rank badge and quickly changed that and corrected it with a subsequent release. Coming down here, we've got a black Imperial officer belt with a silver belt buckle here, 1 silver stud off to the left, and a holster here with a silver stud there on the right side of the figure. The backing card does picture the holster with the blaster inside it, so I like that you can kind of position it like he is pictured there on the backing card. Moving down, of course, the lower half of Imperial officers is fairly plain. Some Imperial officers, especially on screen, have the Jodhpur riding style pants, the sort of military style that have a peak off to the side that comes in. Grand Admiral's pants are straight here, just a little bit loose, so we do have some nice fabric sculpting. And of course, we've got the iconic black shiny Imperial boots there that come up to the knee as well. We've also got that nice blue color for the exposed hands, a very nice match to the blue used for the skin of the face there. Coming round to the back, pretty plain, mostly all white. We've got to that black belt and black boots, and I think it's interesting that we have different details here on the back. Most Imperial officer tunics have seam lines that come in and sort of curve around to meet up with the seam line running down the back of the sleeves, but in Rebels they have his seam lines running up to the shoulders here, so this is accurate to his appearance in the animated series rather than other Imperial officer costumes that we typically see in the live action series. As with other Imperial officers, I'm expecting the articulation to be pretty standard. This is about as sort of unencumbered by armor and decoration as they get, though I'm expecting some of the limitations to be very similar to the director Orson Krennic that I recently opened up from the Vintage Collection line. Because Imperial officer tunics do come down over the hips, we do get a little bit of a limitation around the hips, but I generally don't think of sort of doing any sort of high kicks with my Imperial officers. They are generally more sort of intellectual strategists. Of course, that is perfect for Thrawn, isn't it? So let's check out the articulation. Okay, nice easy joins there at the shoulders. Sometimes my figures are very stiff straight out of the package, but that moved very nicely. Of course, I'm not really going to pose him with his arms all the way up there. He does come with a blaster, but I don't really think of Thrawn as sort of being sort of that kind of action. Of course, he is a bit more of a leader and a strategist, so I'm not really sure quite how I'm going to pose his arms, to be honest, because he doesn't come with any sort of... I kind of wish he came with Hera's wooden calicori, something to hold an accessory that we see him using, his sort of Twi'lek heritage artifact. artifact that he has captured in some of the episodes of Rebels that Hera desperately wants to claim back. I think that that would be just a fun little accessory for him to hold that isn't a blaster. I know I often say that I like to pose my figures holding weapons, especially lightsabers and blasters, but for Thrawn it seems, I don't know, like a little less sort of true to the character. I like to think of him sort of holding one of his beautiful artifacts that he has acquired there. Just testing out the articulation here of the hands, we can see that this one will rock side to side. This one we've got a bit of a front and back motion there. We can see those articulation points there. He does have an extended finger, which I'm hoping will do a very nice job of holding on to the included blaster. The other side is more of that sort of classic rounded C grip there as well. So we've got, oh, that was a bit of a click. Some very clicky joins at the middle there. I don't like that clicking sound. I prefer it to be a smooth motion there. We've got a nice turn on the heads, but this is oh, we can actually put the chin down a little bit. I found on my Krennic figure, he didn't sort of want to tip his neck down. I think perhaps the Imperial collar stops them from looking down, and to me it feels very Imperial to be looking sort of with a high eye line. They don't look down, do they? They're sort of a little bit more snobbish, shall we say, and have a sort of a high eye line there. So now we do have a bit of a split here in the sides. We can see that the holster is sculpted on the tunic. We have a little bit of a gap there, so we'll be able to get that blaster all the way on the underside there. And we also have a split in the tunic on the underside. So it is a little bit rubbery. So I can bend it back and we can see that articulation there at the top of the thighs. We can see the articulation there at the top of the legs as well. But generally, even though this is flexible, it does provide a bit of resistance, especially here over the right leg. While this is made out of the same material as the back here, because this is so bulky, it does restrict how much we can flex it because we've just got this extra sort of layers of plastic here at the hip. I do really like the holster on this figure. It's nice and low profile, but it is going to restrict here. We've got this kind of seam line where the Imperial officer tunics kind of overlap, because you can see there they would put their jackets on with this flap. So technically there is a seam line here, but I find that Hasbro doesn't actually sculpt a split here for their figures. They generally keep them to the sides. So I can swivel the thighs at that swivel point there. Very nice. I like that it's just hidden under the tunic. So we get that articulation, but it's neatly hidden underneath there. But let's test out the legs. So as expected, I can get to here and it's really, really fighting me there. And you can see it kind of wants to stop till we get about there. So testing the other side, I'm expecting, yep, we can go a lot higher on this side. We can get a much tighter curve there because we don't have the holster on this particular side there. But I do find that if you keep them in those types of positions, you can kind of curve and sort of form the plastic. And I like it having a tight sort of seam here with the split, because of course it's not actually part of the costume, it's just there for sort of more of an action figure purpose. So I try and keep those sort of as nice and tight as possible, and I'm not really going to be having my Thrawn figure kicking. I like the fabric sculpting. It comes down pretty close to the top of the boots there, pretty standard for Imperial officer pants, and we can see the articulation there nicely hidden in the sort of monotone white pants there in the back. So as expected, nice and tidy. The boot hits just on the back of the thigh there, but that's a nice pretty standard angle there, and we can tip the toes there as well. Just did a little bit of sort of tweaking of the ankles. I find I generally just need to give them just a little bit of a wiggle when I get them out of the package, because you can see this one's kind of tight. There we go. The figure joins are always just a little bit tight. This one's not going to go back. Okay, there we go. Because yes, they do have peg holes on the underside if you have acrylic stands or something to help pose your 3.75 inch action figures. I find these ones are especially prone to falling over, so I do like to put them on stands. I like that the bases, that we can put them on bases, but I do find the modern figure peg holes are just a little bit smaller than they have been in the past, which means that they don't really fit on a lot of my stands. I'm going to have to source out some new ones with a slightly smaller peg hole there. So there we go. I will have to play around with his posing there just to get him to stand up a little bit better. But overall, good articulation. Of course, he's not a character that I'm going to be doing a lot of wild posing, but there we go. I can see here the paint job is pretty tidy, especially around the details, which are really important to me. Like, we've got the silver for the rank badge and the 3 colors, blue, yellow, and red. We've got the silver code cylinders there and the gold epaulets, and even those tiny little sort of details there on the collar. There are 2 sort of little elements in the paint job, despite it being simple, that I think are just a tiny bit of a miss here. So we can see that the black of the holster is not quite all the way down to the line. There's sort of, I know that it kind of looks tidy because the white reads like this, but when I'm looking up close, I can actually see the white plastic down the side of the holster, so that black paint hasn't come all the way down to the line of the tunic. But honestly, that's not quite the sort of the paint line that I'm really bothered about. We've got a little bit sort of a, I don't know if it's, I think it's just the black paint hasn't been applied fully to the top of the belt there. But we can see on the back that it's actually really nice and tidy along the top surface of the belt going all the way. We've got a little bit here on the underside, but honestly, when you're looking at the figure, you don't really notice that there. Just this one little section here. And if you know me, you know that I am often trying to compare alongside other figures in my local store to see if paint flaws are sort of a common occurrence or a one-off. I can also see that we've just got a little bit of the belt that hasn't been quite covered with black paint there. But speaking about this particular section here, I was able to check out a couple of other figures at my local store, and I found this particular paint abnormality on the other figures in a store as well. So while something like this would normally catch my eye and maybe think maybe I'll grab another one, I found this to be a fairly common occurrence along other figures that I spotted at my local store, so I wasn't too fussed about buying this one. I wasn't going to go mad trying to search around all the Thrawns that I could find in my city trying to find one that didn't have that flaw. And to be honest, when I'm looking at them straight on, I don't really notice it. So I had mentioned earlier that I had recently opened up the vintage collection figure of Director Orson Krennic from Rogue One, and I just thought I'd bring him in for a little bit of comparison, because as you can see, they both wear white Imperial tunics and black boots, and there are a lot of similarities between the 2 figures. They came out quite close together in the vintage collection line as well, and I was kind of curious to see if there were many similarities or perhaps even indeed some shared part usage here. And doing a little bit of comparison, I just want to quickly show that the Director Orson Krennic figure also has that issue of missing black paint along the top of the belt, especially when viewed from the top here like this. In fact, this one even has it running all the way around the back. You can see that the top of the belt is not painted there. If I grab the Thrawn one, you can see that this one actually has a much tidier paint job on the belt there. But I don't know why they both have this issue of sort of missing paint here at the top. It just sort of, I figure that Hasbro must paint the belt and then attach the torso into this connection point, because of course they both move at the torsos, but I'm not quite sure why these parts, particularly this part here just above the holster, always seems to get missed there. So we can see that they both have the silver Imperial rank badges with the appropriate colored squares there, which is nice to see. Obviously Krennic only has 1 code cylinder, our Thrawn has 2, and there are lots of other differences to their tunics. So I'm fairly certain that we don't have a shared torso part here, and even the collars are quite different. Krennic's is much higher than a Thrawn's here. But something that I think is potentially used are the sleeves, because of course they are pretty white and not really featured with any sort of details there. So I think that I can see those same crease lines there. We can see that there's just a very subtle color difference between the 2 white tunics, but I believe those are the same parts. It's hard to tell a little bit because there's almost no detail on the lower half of the sleeve, whether that is the same part there or not, but I can see by the crease lines that the sleeves are the same on both sides there as well. And moving down, the pants are very different because of course we see Director Krennic on the screen, so he has that more of sort of the original trilogy flared jodhpur sort of military style pant there, which The Rebels version of Thrawn does not. So the pants are different. We've also got a different sort of lower half to the tunic. We've got very different holsters there as well. Krennic wears black gloves, so the hands of Thrawn are going to be different there as well. But I noticed that this version of Thrawn has this sort of buckle detail around the top of the boots, and that doesn't appear on quite as many on-screen characters. So I was curious because I had remembered that that was present on the Director Krennic figure. So I believe the lower half of the legs are the same piece here, because I don't think this buckle detail would be included in the Rebels animated series. I'll have to go and study Thrawn's boots, because that seems like a smaller detail considering the sort of overall animated show style. It generally does have just a little less detail. You know, the Thrawn tunic was very smooth. I feel like they have reused the Orson Krennic boot here, which again may of course be used on other Imperial officers as well, because we've got that small little buckle detail there at the back. So a couple of pieces used between the two, but that is no surprise. I really don't see too much point of sculpting a plain white tunic sleeve twice, so no problem with those part usages there. The rest of them do look quite different, and I think it's interesting that the color of the white is even different. Could be down to just different batches of plastic, or perhaps that is very intentional to better sort of reflect the color tone seen in the Rebels animated series. But we'll put Krennic aside there, because now I want to test out the included blaster accessory. This one is really tiny, but it has got some quite cool details there. We've got these very pointed ends here. We've got a very squarish trigger guard there. It is you know, a little bit flat, but we do have some fun details there. It's all over one gray color there. It's not a metallic finish, just a gray plastic there. So he does have that extended trigger finger there, so I'm hoping that this will be an easy fit into his hands. If I can just get his hand to hold still. Okay, so let's get this in there. His fingers are kind of wobbling out of the way, and I'm just going to see if I can get his finger. It's actually extended a little bit further than the trigger guard. I've actually got to sort of tuck that in there. There we go. Okay, so we can see, because it's a nice high contrast, isn't it? Blue and gray. So we can see his finger fits really well. It actually hooks all the way through. Sometimes it just kind of rests in the trigger guard, but that hooks all the way through. So that's a really nice, secure grip. And it looks nice in his hand. It looks like an appropriate size for an Imperial to hold there as well. We don't need big E11 sort of Stormtrooper blaster rifles for him there as well. Very nice. So because he doesn't have that trigger finger in the other hand, I believe it's going to be like other blaster accessories. We can get them to hold it, but because we've got that extended trigger guard, it just kind of sits above the fingers and just looks a little bit awkward there. So I personally wouldn't put it in the left hand there, but let's test it out in the holster like it is pictured on the backing card. So if I can push that, it's a little tight actually. See if I can, is that as far down as it's going to go? Well, on mine, that's as far down as it's going to go. It kind of sits about there. It does feel like that fits in there. I can just see the tip of it extending down there. It does fit under that sort of little dome there on the belt. So when I put his arm down there, it does look pretty good. It is kind of a very short holster. It doesn't come up and cover much of the blaster there, but it does actually fit in there pretty well actually. So there we go. He looks pretty cool. I just wish that part of the belt was a little bit better painted, but that really is the only critique I have for this one. I still think there could have been perhaps a few other, oh yes, and that little paint. It's just a missed a little bit there. I do think there could have been a few tweaks they could have done to the overall design to make it a little closer to the animated series appearance, because this is a Rebels card, but I do understand the point of sort of doing the animated series in the vintage collection style is to kind of make them all look like they're from the same world with the rest of the vintage collection figures, which is of course very realistic. If it was completely smooth with no creases to the fabric, I think it would just start looking a little bit unusual. If we put him alongside other Imperials from the same line. So I'm just going to have to tweak his ankles there just a little bit to get him to stand up nice and securely. He does just want to sit a little bit off kilter there. So I do have some of my other older Grand Admiral Thrawn figures for a little bit of a comparison. So at the time that I am recording this, there are 4 Grand Admiral Thrawn action figures available. I do not have the 4th one. It was with a comic book, and generally any of those kind of deluxe comic book offerings are very hard to find here in New Zealand. They don't make our mainline toy distributors, so I am sadly missing that one. I was never able to source it from overseas, but I do have these ones. This one here in the middle is kind of nostalgic. I'm very fond of this one. This one is of course from the original Kenner Power of the Force 2 Expanded Universe line that came out in 1998, a few years after the original Timothy Zahn books. So he's not quite as white as the other figures, and he's got a much paler blue complexion there. And we've got some slightly different sort of details to his tunic, most notably a gold belt buckle here on his belt here. We've got the same colors on the rank badge, which I like. It's been very consistent throughout the years. And of course, referencing the book and the comics, we have the Ysalamir wrapped around the shoulder, which is removable as an accessory there. And he also comes with a blaster pistol there as well. Moving on for a little bit more of a direct comparison, this is the actual figure released for the Rebels animated series that came out during the Rogue One era, when the Rebels figures were all in this animated style. The Rogue One era was, of course, that 5-point of articulation era as well, which did work, I think, quite well for the animated series. You could get these very smooth lines. It was a much more sort of a simpler style that translated really well for this line of figures, and I think it was felt a little bit more like a toy line, which worked as a tie-in for an animated series. Perhaps a little less fun for the adult collectors, but I appreciate it for the younger fans that were discovering Star Wars through the Rebels animated series there. So this one came out in late 2016, early 2017. The very first release had an incorrect rank badge. The figure we have here is the second release where they corrected it. So we can see these two side by side. Of course, there is a little bit of a height difference. This one is standing on a clearer stand here because of course they don't have the articulation in the ankles and the knees. They're a little bit harder to stand up at times, so I keep this one here on a stand. So we can really see some of the similarities and the big differences between these two. The faces to me are so very different here, but we can see the other details like the gold details, the silver on the collar, the rank badges, the 2 code cylinders, even the belt buckle and the holster here. And we can see Thrawn is holding the same blaster pistol here. And just out of curiosity, I think that might even be... No, it's different. This one doesn't have a trigger guard, but I like that we can see a lot of the similar details, like those pointed ends there and stuff like that. And he does hold it very well in this hand here, but you can see we've got absolutely no articulation other than just that point there at the shoulder. Very squared off holster, which is actually a lot bigger and deeper there. And we can see that tunic detail here in the back where the seam lines go all the way up to the shoulders, which I like seeing that. Of course, in the older ones, there is absolutely no stitch lines here on the back of this one. It's really fun just to see the way that Star Wars toys have evolved over the years. If I sort of put them in a chronological release order here, it's just fantastic. I do really still like the animated series Rebels figures. They match really well to their on-screen appearances, even if they are a little bit more simple. Some of the figures, especially the female characters, have very slender limbs, which does make them hard to stand up, so I do have to put them on the stands. But I think it's really fun that we've now got this one. It sort of feels like a little bit of a evolution of all of them. We've got a lot of the details that reference Thrawn's appearance in the animated series, but in some ways he feels like he is sort of more of an interpretation of the book and comic version of Thrawn, especially with that sculpting of the face. I see the details from the animated series, but it doesn't really look like the animated series face. It's been translated to a human form. And of course, we've now got a 5th version of Grand Admiral Thrawn coming up soon in the Vintage Collection line, the live action version that we see in the Ahsoka series. I'm really excited about that one. It's really funny to think that we've got so many versions of Grand Admiral Thrawn. It's really been fantastic to see how the character has progressed and sort of developed through his appearance in the book and then the comics, then the animated series, and then a live action. It's been fun to see such a fantastic book character really sort of come through to the main sort of Star Wars saga storytelling in the live action era. This has been a really fun unboxing, and especially seeing them side by side. He needs to be, I don't know if maybe he could be a little bit taller. I know he's probably based on a pretty standard human sort of Imperial officer body, but maybe this figure should have been just a little bit taller if I sort of hold him up to be the same. He's definitely shorter than his appearance in the animated style figure there. Don't know if perhaps he maybe should have been a little bit taller. And he's definitely got a different color blue as well. We can really see the differences in the blue. Again, this feels like a little bit more of sort of a somewhere between them all, because he's a little bit more of a darker blue, I think. I think this feels like a little bit more true to how he is in Rebels. And we can even see those sort of red eyes with the black pupils in both of them. Really fun. I do still like this one, but yeah, this is a fantastic figure, and I'm really looking forward to adding another one to my collection. And you know what, when I get those 4 alongside each other, I'm definitely going to have to track down that 5th comic version that came out in the Legacy collection in 2008. I am missing that one. I'm definitely going to have to track that one down, as I am such a big fan of Grand Admiral Thrawn. So there you go. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today as I opened up another Vintage Collection action figure and compared it to a few others and had a lot of fun with this particular uncarding. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening wherever you are in the galaxy, and let's hang out again very soon for more Star Wars fun. May the Force be with you. If you're a Vintage Collection fan, I recently opened up the General Harrison Dula figure. That video is linked here in case you haven't already seen it, as well as a whole Vintage Collection playlist. This is the way.